Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Read and Reread. I am Angelia, and today I am going to talk about some quiet gems of 2023. I've kind of made an accidental series where I have been selecting some different categories of books for my reading year. So I did a mysteries one, I did a dystopian fiction one, and now I'm going to talk about some more understated books. Understated in tone and atmosphere, maybe, but not in the resonance that they had in my reading year. Before we get into that, I'm going to just indicate and then remove this ugly sweater of the day, this vest. I'll put in a picture of what more the whole thing looks like, the full tacky glory of it. This one actually won a costume contest when I loaned it out to a friend a couple years ago when I was still teaching. But it has stuff all over it, and the brand is that brand Christopher Radko that makes those fancy glass ornaments. I don't know why there was a garment, but it sparkles. It's got junk all over the front and the back. It's horrible, and it's hot because it's already 70 degrees here. I think it's going to go up a little hotter. I mean, it's not hot, but it's not really thick vest weather. So here comes some magic. Boop, ah. So that's better. I did retain my Christmas Carol necklace. Anyway, so much with the Christmas splendor. I'm getting a late start in this video today because stuff happened. Stuff came up that I had to attend to, but I'm finally sitting down to talk about these books. So, like I said, in this video, I was thinking about books that I really loved this year that were kind of quieter in tone. So they have the full emotional bandwidth. They're about all different kinds of topics, and they do have good plots, but the book is really more about characters. They're more introspective. They're not necessarily cozy or happy books. They're kind of arranged, but they're just quieter in nature. They are not full of dead bodies like a mystery, and they're not full of existential dread like a dystopian book, but they're just the quieter books that stood out to me in this year. And I found a whole bunch of them when I went through my journal, but I'm just going to highlight a few of them. And this has turned out to be a really great way to avoid coming up with my books of the year list, because I just keep slicing and dicing my book history this year into different categories. And it just gives me a chance to highlight more books that maybe aren't going to be on my top 10, but I really thought that they were strong reads this year. So let's take a look at these quieter books. So the first one is something from I read early in the year, which is Agatha of Little Neon by Claire Luchette. I am eagerly waiting to see what she might release next, or maybe she did. I haven't checked lately. But this was a debut novel, and it came out in, let's see, I'm going to think it's 2021. But I read it this year, and this was a story about a woman named Agnes, who is a young nun, and she lives with a group of other young nuns around her age. I think she's maybe late 20s, I can't exactly remember, but she went in at a very young age after high school. And as the book unfolds, we gradually find out that some of her reasons for entering into that life to begin with were to escape not only some family problems, but also some uncomfortable truths about herself that she wasn't ready to explore and accept. When this book begins, she has a pretty comfortable routine in the convent that she lives in with this group of young sisters. They're very synchronized, and they have a daily routine, and they have a mother nun who kind of manages everything that she really looks up to. But at the beginning of the book, there have been some reshufflings and changes for financial reasons and the fallout of all of the lawsuits against the Catholic Church. Agnes and her group are reassigned in another state to this place called Little Neon, and it's a halfway house. The people that are in this halfway house are not necessarily Catholic or religious at all, but here are these young women that are supposed to offer them counsel and wisdom, and a lot of times they're just not having it. And it's the first time that Agnes has ever gone out into the actual world as an adult. She gets assigned to teach math at a local high school to fill a sudden absence from somebody who walked out. And that also really opens her eyes as to what everyday life is like, what it's like to work in a place and have co-worker relationships, her things that she encounters working with the teenagers at the school. And slowly and gradually, she starts to reassess the way she looks at the world, the way she looks at other people, and then herself. And she's telling this story from a little further along in time and reflecting back on this period. And so we know from the beginning that she's no longer a nun. And then this story takes us through her process. Just her gradual process of getting to know and appreciate herself better, and to question some things that she always accepted and didn't look at closely enough. So that was Agatha of Little Neon. Another one that I read early in the year was a library book, but I'm looking for my own copy, and that is Lucy by the Sea by Elizabeth Strout. So I am embarking on a reread of the Lucy books, and I'm hoping I will start in January with My Name is Lucy Barton. And I have picked up a copy of that and the second book, Anything is Possible, but I still need to get Oh, William and Lucy by the Sea. I've read them all, but I want to read them again, and I have it on good authority from Priscilla, an evening reader, that reading them again in close proximity is a very enriching experience because she has been doing that herself. And I'm going to put a video down below, a recent video she made that she's talking about Oh, William, and she has some really interesting discussion about that book and the character of Lucy and kind of the whole series thus far. So if you are into Elizabeth Strout or you're interested in reading these books, I would recommend you take a look at Priscilla's video. And it definitely has inspired me to quit saying I'm about to read these books and actually get into it. But anyway, I digress. So Lucy by the Sea is the fourth book in this little quartet. So in this book, Lucy and her ex-husband William they leave New York City and they go to Maine during the pandemic. So it is a pandemic COVID novel for one thing. And at the beginning of the book, William, who is, I think he's an epidemiologist, he contacts Lucy and says, there is something really bad coming down the pike and we need to get out of town. We need to tell our daughters to get out of town, and everybody needs to get out of town. And Lucy's, she's kind of like, what? Really? I got a hair appointment. Da 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 da. And he's like, no, Lucy, this is for real. We need to go out to the country. So she does. She goes with him, and you have to read this series to understand why this is not completely bizarre that she's going out to the countryside with her ex-husband. Just take my word that it makes sense in the overall progress of their relationship. But it's about what happens there during that year. And just no great cataclysmic thing happens. It's just living in a different place, living in somebody else's house. There's relationships between she and her daughters, lots of more old baggage to unpack about herself and William. And you gotta be into it. You have to work your way up to this book, but it's really worthwhile when you do. The next book I want to talk about, I feel like it flew under the radar a little bit, and I talked about it earlier in the year, and a few people chimed in and said they enjoyed it also, and that was Signal Fires by Dani Shapiro. And I bought this last year in the Barnes & Noble after Christmas half-price hardback sale, and Stephen and I both really enjoyed it. And all I can say is I really sincerely hope they have that sale again this year because I'm counting on it. Have I mentioned that before? But anyway, Signal Fires is a family drama kind of saga. And what's interesting in this book is a lot of the really big events happen off camera. The big changes in people's lives. We keep coming back around to a group of people at different points, but a lot of the things that would be the most fireworks or whatever don't even happen on screen in the book, except at the very beginning, because at the beginning we're in the mid 80s and a group of teenagers are in a car. They've been drinking, they have an accident, there's some fallout, and there's a lie. And the outcome of all this reverberates down through the decades in for each of these characters that's involved, including their father that comes onto the scene of the accident. It has to do with that family, the siblings in that family and their father, and also a family that lives across the street and their son who's on the autism spectrum, and how the lie and the secret that is kept all those years has affected each person differently in their choices and in their development. I feel like I'm being kind of vague. I just don't want to give too much away, but if you like family sagas and you're okay with ones that aren't giant pot boilers, it's a really good book. The next one I want to talk about is a book that feels like a classic, but it was actually written in 1980, but it has a much older vibe, and that is A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr. Now, this is not obscure by any means. People talk about this on Booktube all the time, but I did read it this year for the first time, and I would be amiss to not mention it in a video about quiet-natured novels. It's also a short novel, so it would be great for Shorty September, or any time that you want something a little on the slimmer side. And this is a book about a man, and I think it was on the Booker list. Was it a short list? I've forgotten. But it's about a man, it's post-World War I, and a young art restorer goes to the countryside. He's been hired to uncover an old painting that's been covered up in a church by layers of paint over the years, and see what it is, if they can identify the piece. Is it an important piece? What's under there? And he's trying to kickstart his career in this field after serving in the war. And he has war trauma. It is affecting his sleep, it's affecting his speech. He just has some issues, and his wife has run off with another man. So he arrives there in just kind of a bad state, and he just wants to hoard up his money as best he can, like live in the church, sleep on the scaffold, spend as little money as possible, interact with as few people as possible, and do this job and see if it gets his career going. And of course, none of that works out that way, because he's going to a small town in the English countryside and with a bunch of other people that he ends up getting involved with in different degrees. It has some wonderful characters. He and also another man who is working on the same property trying to find some lost treasures under the earth. But he's hired to look for one thing, but he's really looking for something else, and he has war traumas of his own. And the interaction between the two of them is really some of my favorite parts of the book. And so when you read it, you feel like you're reading something that was written back in that time period, maybe something written in the 20s or 30s. It's hard to believe that it was actually written in 1980, because it has an older feel to it, and it's just a very finely tuned novel that knew that it should just be short, like the summer that Tom spends, even though he leaves greatly changed. Another book that is about summer is called Summer by Edith Wharton, and this one really is a classic. This one is interesting because Edith Wharton's works are usually set in New York, but she does have a couple of New England set stories, and this is one of them. And it is about a young girl named Charity Royal, who unfortunately was named Charity because she is a charity case, and was adopted by a reverend named Mr. Royal and his wife. But his wife has passed away, and Mr. Royal's thoughts about Charity are not entirely on the up and up. And she is feeling very dead-ended. She's a young woman in her late teens. She has a job at the local library. She's the only person. She just opens it up for a limited number of hours a week and kind of does a pretty half-hearted job of tending to the collection because she just needs something to do, but she's not that interested. She really wants to get out of town. She wants to see the world, have some kind of adventure. She is just right there, so ripe for something to happen, and you would hope it's something good and exciting, and she thinks it is something good and exciting when Lucius Harney comes to town to study some local artwork and architecture. And when a hot man comes to town and there is absolutely nothing else going on, you kind of know where we might be heading in this story. And if you read anything by Edith Wharton, you might have an idea of how things will probably turn out for our young friend Charity Royal. So this is not a happy story, but it has beautiful descriptions, that feel of summer, that feel of being so restless and just ready for something to happen. And it is interesting in its frankness about female desire and sexuality for the time period in which it was written. And it was just an enjoyable read, even though I knew going in it wasn't going to be a Jane Austen type romance ending. So that's Summer by Edith Wharton. Sticking with the classics for a second, I did reread Persuasion this year by Jane Austen. This is a book I've reread several times. The Jane Austen in general, I'm kind of just on a ever-looping rotation of reading. It might be my favorite. I change my favorite all the time between Pride and Prejudice, Emma, and Persuasion. But Emma's kind of fallen down into the second rung in the last couple times I've read it. So Persuasion is up there at the top. It is the story of Anne Elliot, and she's a woman in her late 20s, which is considered very mature in Jane Austen's time, and she regrets the one that got away, Captain Wentworth. She was given some pretty bum advice when she was very young about whether or not she should marry Captain Wentworth, but they were very much in love. And so when he comes back into the picture years later, she really starts to go over her second thoughts. And now that she's more mature, she can kind of see the machinations in her family, why people might have advised her the way she did, maybe not maliciously, but what their agenda was, of their perspective, and what hers is, and how she has changed over time. So there's a lot of reflection, regret, and then you get all of the good stuff with all the different people in the parlor scenes, and her family is a piece of work. And I think there could be a whole video about the piece of work family members in Jane Austen. The tricky dads, the hypochondriacs, a lot of people who need management in these books, and then our main characters or heroines are managers. And so there's no exception here. There's some scenes that really crack me up with her father and her younger sister. But overall, it's just a beautiful story. And the letter at the end. I have a t-shirt with the letter because I love it so much. On a very different wavelength, another shorty that was kind of quiet-natured and really good was Boulder by Eva Baltasar, translated by Julia Sanchez. This was a book about a woman who, we don't know what her real name is, but her nickname is Boulder. That was given to her by her girlfriend Samsa. And Boulder is a cook that works on ships, on cargo ships. Boulder is a major introvert. She is told by a chef that she works with in a restaurant that there's absolutely nothing wrong with her work, but she's just impossible to work with. And so she needs to go get a job where she works all by herself. And so she does on the ships. And she's very happy with this for a long time until she meets Samsa. And Samsa encourages her to stop the ship life and set up house with her. And it's a story about Boulder being in love with Samsa, but having to try to accommodate someone who, she's making the accommodations herself to things that she doesn't really want to do, she's not comfortable with. She doesn't want to live or own a house. She likes small spaces, and she really doesn't want to have a child, and that's what Samsa wants most of all. And so this process of agreeing to go along with this, even though she has enormous trepidations. And this, the changes that that creates in a relationship and the way that parenthood changes people. There's just so much in this slim volume, and it would be a great discussion book in a group. I know a lot of us talked about it a few months ago here and there on Booktube, but it was really good. Okay, I think I have two more. One book that I really loved that just gave me peace and joy and happy vibes this year was The Stromness Dinner by Peter Benson. And this has one of my favorite characters of the year, Ed Beach. He is a builder. He can fix your roof. He can renovate your kitchen. He can fix your bathroom. He's a handy guy. He has talents. He has pride in his work, and he has this business with his dad, and that's what they do. And Ed is hired by a guy, and they live in London. So Ed is hired by this guy who lives in the kind of swanky part of town where they're turning warehouses into cool loft apartments. And he goes and redoes this guy's kitchen. And in the time when he's there, that man finds out that his father has died, and he has to go and deal with all of that. And then a few weeks later, the man calls him again and says, "Hey, we're getting the house ready, my father's house ready to sell. Could you come and fix this house?" And it's out in the Orkney Islands. So he decides to take this job, and that's where the adventure begins. But the adventure is just going on a drive, going to this house, and what things happen while he's there doing this work. So there is no huge event, but there's so much richness in Ed's thoughts and his personality and the way that he interacts with the other characters. And it's super satisfying where all of this leads to. It really, it nourished my soul when I read it, because I read it. This was one of the books I talked about that I read at a time where I really needed something a little more on the happier side. And it's not corny or cozy, but it is uplifting. And I just loved this character and this book. And you have to read the whole book all the way to the end to find out why it's called The Stromness Dinner. But it's worth it once you get there. So last but definitely not least was a book that I really loved that I read this year, and it came out in 2009, and that is Brooklyn by Colm Toibin. This was the first book I read by this author, even though I talked a big talk about getting ready to read this author and wanting to read him for months and months and months. And finally I broke through and read Brooklyn, and then I immediately went out and bought two more books, Colm Toibin, but I haven't read them yet, but I'm getting there. This was just beautiful and exquisite. It is the story of Eilish, a young girl. I think I figured out what this year was when I was reading it. I think it was about 1950. And she gets an opportunity to move to Brooklyn from her town in Ireland. And having no job prospects in the town that she lives in, she takes this opportunity. And it is a huge thing for her. She leaves her home and family. She travels on a ship voyage to Brooklyn, where she has a spot in a rooming house with a very mercurial landlady. She gets a job at a department store with an even weirder boss, and she gets occasional help from the local priest who got her these placements, and she meets a guy. None of these things sound cataclysmic, but to Eilish, all of them are huge firsts in a young woman's life. Leaving home, getting a job, having to navigate with other adults that aren't part of your family, and falling in love. All of these things are just giant events. I read too many books with terrible reverends and priests. So for the priest to actually be nice and sympathetic and helpful was a delightful surprise. And I don't think I'm giving too much away. It's not like there's a suspense about if the priest is bad or not. He's not. He's good. But just the choices that she makes and the way that she navigates things, and it's very realistic too. The things that she ducks or avoids or procrastinates on, or she makes some weird decisions that are all kind of in the name of dodging making real decisions, and it's so accurate for a person in their late teens. And anyway, I loved Eilish, even though sometimes I was just like, what? Why don't you just say this, or why did you do that? And but it was all very, very believable. And I have heard that he has a new book coming out. Did it come out? I kind of lost track. Again, I'm thinking of it now. I'm thinking I never went back to see. I don't think it came out yet. But it's going to be Eilish in the future, like older Eilish, and I can't wait to see. I hope it's really good. But in the meantime, I have two other books that I picked up by him to read and get further into the Toibin whatever library collection. Anyway, it was so good. So there are some books for you in case you're looking for something with the more toned down vibes, but deceptively deep and emotionally satisfying novels that I read in 2023. I hope that you are having an excellent week. I will be back for Friday Reads. Let me know what you think about any of these books or another book from this category that you loved so I can put it on my list. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Oh, and I also forgot, I thought of a song to go along with this, and it is a Christmas song. It is sad, bittersweet, and melancholy, but also funny, and you're never going to hear it played on your Christmas radio station, and I'm going to link it below, and it is Christmas Card from a Hooker in Minneapolis by Tom Waits. Give it a listen. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.